The night was cold, and the wind howled outside as Ben sat in his small, quiet house. He lived alone on the edge of a small town, where he spent most of his days repairing old machines. It wasn't an exciting life, but he liked the peace. No big city noise, no distractions. Just him, his tools, and the hum of circuits coming back to life. Tonight, however, peace was nowhere to be found. A heavy storm raged outside, rain pounding against the windows. Ben sipped his warm coffee and sighed. "Another long night," he muttered. Then, something unusual happened. A loud thud echoed from his front porch. At first, he thought the wind had knocked over a tree branch. But then he heard something else, a faint, weak sound. It almost sounded like a voice. Frowning, he put down his cup and grabbed a flashlight. As he opened the door, the cold wind rushed in, making him shiver. The rain poured heavily, but his eyes quickly focused on something unexpected. Lying just outside his door was a figure. At first glance, it looked human, but something was different. The figure was small and covered in what seemed like a torn metallic suit. The skin was pale with a faint bluish tint. Long, silver hair stuck to its face, drenched in rain. It was a woman, or at least she looked like one. Ben knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. Her breathing was shallow, her body weak. He didn't know who she was or where she had come from, but one thing was clear: she needed help. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than expected, almost weightless. Carefully, he carried her inside, placing her gently on his old couch. The warmth of the room seemed to make her stir slightly, but she didn't wake up. Ben quickly grabbed a towel and wrapped it around her, trying to dry her off. As he did, he noticed something strange. Her ears were slightly pointed, and delicate patterns ran along her arms, glowing faintly in the dim light. Definitely not human. His heart pounded. An alien, he whispered to himself. For a moment, he just stared at her, unsure of what to do. He had always believed in the possibility of life beyond Earth, but seeing it with his own eyes was something else entirely. His thoughts were interrupted when she let out a weak sound, almost a whisper. Her eyelids fluttered slightly, but she didn't wake. He realized she must be starving. Without wasting time, he went to the kitchen and grabbed a bowl of warm soup. He wasn't sure if she could eat human food, but it was worth a try. Carefully, he sat beside her and gently touched her shoulder. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked softly. Her eyes slowly opened, bright, silver-blue orbs that shimmered in the dim light. She blinked a few times, looking at him in confusion. Then, as if realizing where she was, she tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. "Easy," Ben said, holding up the bowl. "You need to eat first." She looked at the bowl, then at him. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with shaky hands, she took the spoon and sipped the soup. Her expression softened, and a small sigh escaped her lips. Ben watched as she slowly ate, relief washing over him. Whoever she was, wherever she had come from, she was safe now. As the storm continued to rage outside, he sat beside her, waiting. He had a feeling that his quiet life had just changed forever. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world outside fresh and quiet. Sunlight poured through the windows of Ben's small house, warming the air. He sat in a worn-out chair across from the couch, where the mysterious alien woman still slept. Her breathing was steady now, and the pale color of her skin looked healthier. Ben couldn't stop staring. It still felt unreal. An actual alien, right there in his living room. He had grown up reading books about space and watching old science fiction movies, but he never thought he would meet someone from another world. As he sipped his coffee, the woman stirred. Her silver-blue eyes blinked open slowly, scanning the room with caution. When her gaze landed on him, she tensed. "It's okay," Ben said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe here." For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes darted around the room. taking in the shelves of tools, the faint hum of a half-repaired machine on the table, and the soft glow of the fireplace. Finally, she looked back at him, her expression unreadable. "Where am I?" Her voice was soft and smooth, but there was a strange tone to it, like she wasn't used to speaking his language. "You're on Earth," Ben answered. "You collapsed outside my door last night. I'd brought you inside." The woman tilted her head slightly, as if processing his words. "Earth," she repeated, almost to herself. Ben nodded. "Yeah, and you are." For a few seconds, she hesitated, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust him. But something in his calm voice must have reassured her. "My name is Ari," she said quietly. "Ari," Ben repeated. "I'm Ben." She gave a slight nod, her posture still tense. Ben noticed how thin she looked, almost too thin. Whatever had happened to her, she had clearly been through something difficult. "You should eat more," he said, standing up. "I'll make breakfast." As he moved to the kitchen, he kept an eye on her. Ari's gaze followed him, but she didn't speak. She seemed curious, studying every little thing he did, from how he cracked the eggs to the way the stove hissed softly. When he returned with a plate of eggs and toast, she hesitated before taking a bite. The moment the food touched her tongue, her expression softened with surprise. She ate slowly at first, but with each bite, her hunger became clearer. "You must have been starving," Ben said, watching her. Ari paused, setting down the fork carefully. "I was," she admitted. Silence filled the room for a while. Ben didn't push her with questions, though his mind swirled with curiosity. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she alone? After finishing her food, Ari leaned back slightly. Her posture relaxed just a little. "Thank you," she said quietly. "No problem," Ben replied with a small smile. "You're not exactly the kind of visitor I expected, though." A faint flicker of amusement crossed her face, but it vanished quickly. "I did not mean to come here," she said. Her voice grew softer. "My ship, it broke during escape. I crashed here by mistake." "Escape?" Ben's curiosity sharpened. "From what?" Ari hesitated again. Her silver blue eyes darkened slightly, as if the memories troubled her. "The Valric Dominion," she said, her tone colder. "They destroyed my world. I was one of the few who survived." Ben's stomach twisted. He wasn't sure what the Valric Dominion was, but from the sadness in her voice, it was clear they were no friends. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Ari looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her expression. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "I am not one of your kind." Ben shrugged. "Doesn't matter. You needed help, so I helped." His voice was calm, but there was a warmth in his words. "That's what people do. At least, that's what I do." For a moment, she didn't speak. Something about his answer seemed to confuse her, but also comfort her. Finally, she whispered, "Not many would do the same." Ben chuckled lightly. "Guess I'm not like most people." A faint, almost fragile smile touched her lips. It was the first real sign that she was beginning to trust him. As the sunlight grew brighter through the windows, something shifted between them. She was no longer just a mysterious alien on his doorstep. She was Ari, a survivor from a broken world. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Ben knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face whatever came next alone. Over the next few days, Ari grew stronger. The color returned to her pale skin, and her movements became steadier. Ben did his best to make her feel comfortable, though he knew Earth must feel strange to her. Every day, she asked quiet questions about his home, his world, and the people who lived there. One morning, as Ben repaired an old radio on his workbench, Ari stood nearby, watching him closely. Her silver blue eyes followed every movement of his hands. She seemed fascinated by the way he worked, carefully, patiently, as if every broken thing deserved to be fixed. "You fix everything?" she asked softly. Ben smiled. "I try," he said. "Machines break down all the time, but most people throw them away. I like giving things a second chance. Ari tilted her head slightly. Your people, they do not repair what is broken. Not always, Ben admitted. But I do. For a moment, she was quiet. Then she said, almost in a whisper, I was broken. Ben looked up, meeting her gaze. And now you're healing, he said gently. Ari's expression softened, and a hint of warmth flickered in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but Ben could tell his words meant something to her. Later that afternoon, Ben decided to show Ari more of Earth. The storm had passed, and the sky was clear and blue. He grabbed an old jacket and tossed her a warm sweater. She examined it curiously before slipping it on. It was a little big on her, but it made her smile. A small, real smile. They walked through the fields behind his house, the ground still damp from the rain. Ari's steps were careful, as if she wasn't used to soft earth beneath her feet. She paused often, touching the bark of a tree or brushing her fingers against the petals of wildflowers. This world, she said quietly. It is peaceful. Ben chuckled. Most days, yeah. Not much happens around here. Ari knelt by a patch of wildflowers, her silver hair falling over her shoulders. My home was not like this, she murmured. It was always bright. Machines in the sky, lights everywhere. But then, the Valric came. Her voice trembled slightly. And they took everything away. Ben's chest tightened. He didn't fully understand what she had been through, but the pain in her voice was real. I'm sorry, he said softly. No one should lose their home. Ari stood slowly and turned to face him. Why do you care? She asked. Her tone wasn't cold, just curious. I am not human. I am different. Ben shrugged, his smile easy and warm. Different doesn't mean bad, he said. You needed help, so I helped. Isn't that what anyone would do? Ari seemed to think about his words for a long moment. In her galaxy, kindness was rare. Yet, here on Earth, this human, who had no reason to trust her, had given her food, shelter, and warmth. As they walked back toward the house, Ben led her to a small hill where the view stretched for miles. The sun hung low, casting golden light over the fields. Ari stopped, her eyes wide with wonder. It's beautiful, she whispered. Ben smiled, sitting down on the grass. Yeah, it never gets old. Ari hesitated before sitting beside him. For a while, they simply watched the sunset in silence. Ben found himself wondering what it must be like to see Earth for the first time, to find beauty after so much loss. Your people, Ari began softly. You do not travel the stars, but you protect each other. Why? Ben thought for a moment before answering. Because that's what family does, he said. Even when things get tough, you stick together. You don't leave anyone behind. Ari's face grew thoughtful. The word family felt distant to her, like a memory from another life. Her people had been scattered across the galaxy, their homes destroyed. She had been alone for so long. Family, she repeated quietly. Ben glanced at her, sensing the weight behind her words. You've got one now, he said simply. Ari's breath caught in her throat. For the first time since she had landed on Earth, the emptiness inside her felt a little smaller. Ben's words weren't just kindness. They felt like a promise. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting soft shadows across the hill, Ari made a quiet decision. She would stay. Earth was not her home. But here, with Ben, she wasn't broken anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she had found something even more valuable than a place to belong. She had found someone who wouldn't leave her behind. Days turned into weeks, and Ari slowly grew used to life on Earth. Each day, she grew stronger, and her curiosity about the human world only deepened. Ben found himself enjoying her company more than he expected. For someone who had spent so long living alone, having someone to share his quiet life with felt nice. One morning, Ben was in his workshop, fixing an old generator. Sparks flew as he tightened a loose wire. Ari stood nearby, watching closely as usual. She had taken a keen interest in his work, always eager to understand how things worked. "You fix with patience," Ari said softly, breaking the silence. "Most beings, they rush. But you take time." Ben smiled, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Machines don't like to be rushed," he said. "If you treat them right, they last longer." Ari tilted her head thoughtfully. "It is strange," she said. "Your people are not the most advanced. Yet you care about the smallest things." Ben laughed lightly. "Well, we don't have starships or fancy technology, but we know how to make things work with what we've got." Ari stepped closer, holding a small device in her hands. It was the broken data core she had carried when he first found her. For days, she had been trying to repair it. But human tools weren't designed for Surin technology. "I need this to work," she said quietly. "It holds everything. Memories, knowledge. It is all that remains of my people." Ben took the device gently from her hands and examined it. The circuits were delicate, and the core pulsed faintly with a dim blue light. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, but that didn't stop him from trying. "I'll help you fix it," he promised. Ari's expression softened. She didn't speak, but the gratitude in her eyes was clear. A signal in the dark. Unbeknownst to them, far above Earth, something stirred. The broken signal from Ari's crash had finally reached an unseen listener, a Valric scout ship. Its sleek, black form hung in the cold void, scanning the quiet edges of the solar system. Inside, a tall Valric officer stood before a glowing display. His sharp eyes narrowed as he studied the faint energy signature. "She's alive," he muttered. With a cold smile, he turned to his crew. "Prepare the landing craft. We've found her." Strange readings. Back on Earth, Ben and Ari worked side by side late into the night. He showed her how to use human tools, while she explained the advanced Surin circuits. Together, they were making progress, slow but steady. As Ari connected a final wire, the data core flashed brightly, humming with new energy. Her face lit up with hope. "It's working," she said softly. Ben grinned. "Told you we'd fix it." But as the core came online, something unexpected happened. A strange beeping sound echoed from Ben's workbench. Frowning, he walked over to an old radio scanner he had modified for long-range signals. "That's weird," he muttered. Ari stepped beside him. "What is it?" "I'm picking up a signal. But it's not from Earth," Ben said, adjusting the dials. "It's too strong, too precise." Ari's expression shifted to worry. "The Valrek," she whispered. Ben's stomach tightened. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" Ari nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "If they find me, they will not stop. They destroy everything they touch. Your world, it is in danger now. Humans don't run." For a long moment, Ben was quiet, his mind racing. He could have told her to leave, could have let her escape before the Valric arrived. But that wasn't who he was. "They're not taking you," he said firmly. Ari looked at him with surprise. "You would fight for me." Ben shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Your family now. And humans? We don't leave family behind." Her silver blue eyes softened with something more than gratitude, something like trust. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. "We will stop them together," she said quietly. Ben nodded. "Yeah. Let's show them Earth isn't an easy target." As the stars above shimmered in the night sky, two unlikely allies stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. Inside Ben's small house, the air felt heavy with tension. The faint hum of the repaired data core filled the room, but neither Ben nor Ari spoke. Both knew the truth. The Valric were coming. Ben leaned over his workbench, tightening a screw on an old communication jammer. His hands moved with steady focus, but his mind raced. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. but he wasn't going to let anyone hurt Eri. Across the room, Eri worked quietly, modifying a small energy device she had salvaged from the wreckage of her ship. Her silver-blue eyes burned with determination. She had lost her home once. She would not lose this one too. "Almost done," Ben said, wiping his hands on a cloth. Eri looked up. "What does it do?" "It'll block their sensors," Ben explained. "If they scan for you, they won't find anything." Eri nodded, impressed. "Your world may be simple, but your mind, it is clever." Ben chuckled softly. "Guess humans have a few tricks after all." The light in the sky. The night grew darker, stars twinkling overhead. Ben stepped outside to check the sky, the cool air brushing against his face. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful. Then he saw it. A distant light, small but growing brighter, cut through the sky. It wasn't a shooting star. It moved too smoothly, too deliberately. His heart pounded. "They're here." Ben hurried back inside. "Eri," he said, his voice serious. "They're coming." Eri's body tensed. She grabbed the energy device and stood beside him. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Ben said, "but we're not running." Eri's gaze softened as she looked at him. "You should not fight for me," she said quietly. "If they catch us, it will not be easy." Ben met her eyes without hesitation. "I told you, I'm not leaving you behind." For a moment, neither spoke. In Eri's world, no one had ever fought for her before, but here, on this quiet little planet, a human was willing to stand beside her. "Then we fight," Eri said firmly. Preparing for battle. They worked quickly. Ben set up the jammer on the roof while Eri powered her energy device, a small but powerful pulse emitter that could disable electronics. Together, they placed defenses around the house, using what little technology they had to slow down the Valric if they landed. When everything was ready, Ben and Eri stood side by side, watching the sky. The light was closer now, glowing bright like a second moon. Ben took a deep breath. "What do they want with you, anyway?" Eri's expression darkened. "The Valric destroy what they cannot control. My people resisted them, so they wiped out our home. I am one of the last survivors, and they want to erase us completely." Ben clenched his fists. "Not on my watch." Eri glanced at him, a hint of a smile on her lips. "You are stubborn," she said softly. Ben grinned. "Yeah, that's another human trait." The enemy arrives. A low, humming sound filled the air. Ben's heart pounded as a sleek, black Valric scout ship descended, landing in the far field. The ship was cold and smooth, its surface reflecting no light. A metal door slid open, and 3 figures stepped out. They were tall and thin, their armor gleaming under the moonlight. Their eyes glowed a cold, cruel red as they scanned the area. Ben whispered, "Are those?" Eri nodded. "Valric hunters." One of the hunters raised a scanning device, sweeping it across the field. But as it passed over the house, the signal flickered. Ben's jammer was working. "They can't see us," Ben whispered, relief in his voice. Eri's grip on the pulse emitter tightened. "Not yet." The first strike. One of the Valric hunters stepped closer, moving with eerie silence. Ben held his breath, waiting for the right moment. "Now," Eri said softly. Ben flipped a switch, activating a high-frequency pulse. The nearest hunter staggered, its sensors disrupted. In a flash, Eri fired her energy device. A bright pulse shot through the air, striking the hunter's armor and knocking it to the ground. The other 2 hunters reacted quickly, moving toward the house. Ben grabbed a makeshift launcher, a modified flare gun he had upgraded with Eri's help, and fired a blast toward them. It wasn't much, but it was enough to slow them down. "They're not happy," Ben muttered. Eri's voice was calm but fierce. "Let them come." Stronger together. The hunters advanced, but Ben and Eri fought side by side. Her technology and his quick thinking made a powerful combination. Each time the Valric tried to close in, they pushed them back. But the battle wasn't over. The leader of the hunters raised a strange, glowing weapon, pointing it at the house. "They're going to destroy everything," Ben warned. Aries' jaw tightened. "Not if I stop them." Before Ben could stop her, she stepped forward, charging her pulse emitter to full power. A brilliant burst of light exploded from the device, striking the leader's weapon and shattering it in his hands. The hunters hesitated, just long enough for Ben to trigger the final defense. With one last pulse, the jammer overloaded, sending a shockwave through the air. The Valric's systems flickered and failed, forcing them to retreat. As the ship rose back into the sky, Ben let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We did it," he said, turning to Ari. Ari nodded, though her expression remained serious. "For now." Ben smiled, exhaustion in his voice. "Not bad for a human, huh?" Ari's gaze softened as she looked at him. "Not bad at all." As the stars returned to their quiet shimmer, one thing was clear: they had faced the danger together, and neither of them would ever stand alone again. The night was quiet again, but the air still felt heavy with tension. The Valric scout ship had retreated, disappearing into the sky. Yet Ben knew this wasn't over. If they had found Ari once, they would come again, stronger and more dangerous. Inside the house, Ben dropped onto the couch, exhaustion tugging at his muscles. Ari sat across from him, the soft glow of the repaired data core flickering between them. Though the danger had passed for now, neither of them felt safe. "They'll be back," Ben said, breaking the silence. Ari nodded slowly. "Yes, the Valric do not stop." Her voice was quiet, but there was no fear in it, only certainty. "They want to erase every trace of my people." Ben leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Why? Why go through so much trouble to hunt you down?" Ari hesitated, her silver blue eyes distant. For days, she had avoided telling him everything, but after tonight, she knew he deserved the truth. "There is something they fear," she said softly. "A weapon. A power my people created long ago to protect our worlds. The Valric destroyed us to keep it hidden, but they never found it." Ben's brow furrowed. "And you know where it is?" Ari shook her head. "Not exactly, but the answers are inside the data core. It holds the last map to the lost Siren Vault, the place where the weapon sleeps." Ben glanced at the glowing device. "If the Valric get their hands on it, they will become unstoppable," Ari finished. Her voice grew colder. "They will burn every world they find, including this one." Ben's heart pounded. Until now, he had thought of the Valric as just a distant alien threat. But if they wanted this weapon, Earth wasn't safe, and neither was Ari. "We can't let that happen," he said firmly. Ari studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You would risk your life to stop them." Ben shrugged, his voice calm. "You're not the only one who's lost something, Ari. I've seen what happens when people stand by and do nothing. I'm not that kind of person." A faint, almost fragile smile touched her lips. "You are different," she whispered, unlocking the past. They turned their attention to the data core. Though they had repaired its basic functions, the deeper knowledge, the location of the Siren Vault, was still locked behind ancient security codes. "I can access it," Ari said, fingers brushing over the device. "But it will take time, and the Valric will not wait." Ben stood up and stretched. "Then let's work fast. You handle the tech. I'll make sure we're ready if they come back." Ari nodded, her focus sharpening. She connected the data core to a power source and began working through the complex Siren algorithms. Symbols and strange patterns flickered across the small screen. Meanwhile, Ben gathered everything they might need: tools, old radio parts, and a few makeshift weapons he had been tinkering with. His workshop wasn't a military base, but it was home. And he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional hum of machines. Outside, the night deepened, the stars shining cold and bright. Finally, Eri let out a quiet breath. "I found something," she said. Ben hurried over, his curiosity burning. "What is it?" A holographic map flickered to life above the data core. It showed a star system far from Earth, a place untouched by Valric scanners. At its center was a barren, icy moon marked with Siren symbols. "This is the vault," Eri explained, her voice soft with wonder. "If the weapon still exists, it is here." Ben stared at the glowing image. "Can we get there?" Eri hesitated. "My ship is damaged beyond repair," she admitted, "but there may be another way. If we can send a signal to the old Siren outposts, we could find a ship or call for help." Ben scratched the back of his neck. "Okay, but won't that signal attract the Valric too?" Eri's expression grew serious. "Yes," she said quietly. "But if we do nothing, they will find the vault first. And no world will be safe." A dangerous choice. Ben fell silent, thinking through their options. Sending the signal was risky. It could lead the Valric right to them. But if Eri was right, they couldn't afford to wait. After a long pause, he nodded. "Let's do it." Eri blinked, surprised. "You are sure?" Ben gave her a half-smile. "I didn't come this far to back down now." Eri's expression softened. For so long, she had carried this burden alone, fighting to survive while her people faded into memory. But here was a human who stood beside her, no matter how dangerous things became. "You are brave," she said softly. Ben chuckled, or just stubborn. Together, they began preparing the signal. Eri modified the old radio scanner, while Ben reinforced the jammer to keep them hidden as long as possible. Time was running out, but they worked with quiet determination. Two strangers from different worlds, united by a common fight. As dawn broke over the horizon, the signal was ready. Eri's finger hovered over the activation switch. "Once we send this, there is no turning back," she warned. Ben met her gaze without hesitation. "Then let's finish what we started." With a quiet nod, Eri pressed the switch. A pulse of energy shot through the air, carrying their message across the stars. Far above Earth, unseen by human eyes, the Valric fleet stirred. The hunt was not over, and the real battle had only just begun. The soft hum of the transmitter filled the small workshop as Eri's signal vanished into the cold depths of space. Ben leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the blinking lights with a heavy heart. Once the message was sent, there was no way to take it back. Eri stood beside the machine, her silver-blue eyes fixed on the display. The faint glow reflected on her face, but her thoughts were far away, on a lost world and a weapon hidden for centuries. Ben broke the silence. "How long until someone answers?" Eri sighed quietly. "If there are still Siren outposts, hours, maybe days." Her voice softened. "If not, no one will come." Ben frowned, but nodded. "And the Valric?" "They will hear it too," Eri admitted. "They are always listening." The weight of her words hung between them. The moment that signal left Earth, they had drawn the attention of the galaxy's most dangerous hunters. There was no going back now. A quiet moment. Ben tried to push away the tension. "Well," he said, forcing a smile, "since we're waiting, you want some breakfast." Eri blinked, surprised by his calmness. "Breakfast?" "Yeah," Ben chuckled. "Humans eat when we're stressed. It's kind of our thing." Eri tilted her head in that curious way of hers. "Your species is strange." "And yours isn't," Ben teased as he walked toward the kitchen. "Come on, I make a pretty good omelet." A few minutes later, they sat at the small table. The warm smell of eggs filled the air. For a brief moment, the danger outside seemed far away. Eri picked at her food, her slender fingers careful and graceful. "Why do you help me, Ben?" Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. "You could have left me. It is not your fight." Ben paused, meeting her gaze. Because no one deserves to fight alone, he said simply. And maybe I was tired of being alone too. A flicker of emotion crossed Ares' face, something softer, more fragile. For someone who had lost everything, his words meant more than he realized. You are not alone now, she said quietly. Ben smiled. Neither are you. A shadow in the sky. Their quiet moment shattered when a sharp beeping filled the room. Ares' head snapped up, her body tense. Something is coming. Ben rushed to the workshop, scanning the old radar system he had rigged months ago. A bright dot blinked on the edge of the screen, too fast for any Earth craft. It's not one of ours, Ben muttered. Ares stood beside him, her expression serious. Valric. Ben grabbed his homemade launcher and handed Ares her pulse emitter. We knew they'd come, he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. Ares' voice was calm but fierce. They will not take us easily. Outside, the wind stirred the tall grass as a sleek, black Valric scout ship cut through the sky. It hovered silently above the fields before descending with eerie grace. A chill ran down Ben's spine. Guess we're not getting any more quiet breakfasts, he muttered. Ares' lips curled into a faint smile. I did not like eggs anyway. The first move. The Valric ship's landing ramp hissed open, and 3 hunters stepped out. Their armor gleamed under the early morning sun, cold and unyielding. The leader held a scanning device, its red lights flickering as it traced the signal's origin. They are here, he said in a low mechanical voice. Ben crouched behind the workshop door, heart pounding. You sure your jammer's still working? He whispered. Ares nodded. It hides us, for now. Ben exhaled slowly. Then let's make them regret coming here. He flipped a switch on the jammer, sending out an interference pulse. The Valric scanners flickered and sputtered, unable to lock onto their position. The hunters paused, confused, but not for long. One of them raised a sleek weapon and fired a pulse of red energy toward the house, the blast shaking the ground. Ben winced. Well, there goes my roof. Ares held her pulse emitter tight. We strike now. Without waiting, she stepped from the shadows and fired. A bright blue pulse struck the nearest Valric hunter, sending sparks flying as its armor short-circuited. Ben followed her lead, launching a modified flare toward the second hunter. It exploded in a burst of heat and light, forcing the alien back. The leader turned toward Ares, raising a weapon unlike the others, a sleek black staff that hummed with raw energy. That doesn't look friendly, Ben muttered. Ares' eyes narrowed. It is a disruptor. If it touches us, we will not survive. Ben swallowed hard. Great. A desperate gamble. The Valric leader advanced, his cold red eyes locked on Ares. Ben knew they couldn't win a straight fight, not against technology this advanced. We need to end this fast, he said. Ares nodded. I have one more pulse, strong enough to disable their ship, but I must get close. Ben's heart pounded. I'll distract them. You finish this. Without waiting for an answer, he stepped out of cover, raising his launcher. Hey, tin can, over here, he shouted. The Valric leader turned toward him, weapon glowing. Ben fired a flare, forcing the alien to block the blast. In that moment, Ares moved, silent and swift. She darted toward the ship, her pulse emitter glowing brighter with every step. The leader saw her too late. Ares unleashed the full energy of her weapon, sending a wave of blue light crashing into the ship's core. The vessel sparked violently, its systems failing. Ben cheered. You did it. The Valric, weakened and exposed, staggered back toward their damaged ship. Without their technology, they couldn't fight. Ares returned to Ben's side, breathing hard but victorious. They will leave, for now. As the broken ship rose into the sky, Ben let out a long breath. We're still standing, he said with a tired smile. Ares met his gaze, her expression softer now. Because we stand together. And as the morning sun rose, one thing was clear. The battle was far from over, but together They were stronger than the Valric had ever expected. The morning sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the quiet fields. The damaged ground still held the scars of the battle, burned grass, and broken metal scattered near Ben's house. The Valric ship was gone, but the threat still lingered like a shadow. Inside the workshop, Ben tightened the last bolt on the pulse emitter, his hand steady despite the exhaustion pulling at his body. Across from him, Ari sat at the workbench, scanning the data core for any signs of a reply. It had been hours since they sent the signal. Hours of waiting and watching the sky. Ben leaned back and sighed. Any luck? Ari's silver-blue eyes remained fixed on the glowing screen. Not yet, she said quietly, but someone will answer. They must. He studied her face, noticing the tired lines beneath her eyes. She had been running from the Valric for so long, always alone, always afraid to stop, until now. You should rest, Ben suggested. I'll keep watch. Ari shook her head. No. If the Valric return, we must be ready. Her voice was calm, but there was a trace of worry beneath the surface. Ben smiled softly. You don't have to do everything alone, you know. Ari's gaze softened as she looked at him. I know, she whispered, and I am grateful. A light in the dark. Hours passed. The day stretched into evening, the sky turning soft shades of purple and gold. Ben and Ari worked in silence, repairing, preparing, waiting. Then, just as the first stars began to appear, the data core beeped. Ari's head snapped up. A signal, she said, her voice filled with sudden hope. Ben rushed over, his heart pounding. Is it the Valric? Ari shook her head. No, it is Siren. With a few quick motions, she decoded the message. A holographic map flickered to life, showing a new location, an ancient Siren outpost hidden in a distant asteroid belt. The coordinates glowed brightly, a beacon of hope. Ben let out a low whistle. That's far, he said. How do we get there? Ari's fingers danced across the controls. The message includes an access key. If we can reach the outpost, there may be a ship, one strong enough to take us to the vault. Ben grinned. Finally, some good news. But Ari's face remained serious. The Valric will know of this place too. They will not let us reach it easily. Ben's smile faded, but he nodded. Then we'll just have to get there first. A dangerous journey. The next problem was transportation. Ari's ship was destroyed, and Ben's old truck wasn't exactly spaceworthy. They needed a way off Earth, and fast. Ben tapped his chin, thinking. I know someone, he said slowly. A pilot. He owes me a favor. Ari raised an eyebrow. You trust him? Ben chuckled. Not really. But he likes money, and I had a little saved up. That night, they left the safety of the farm, traveling under the cover of darkness. Ben drove his dusty truck down winding country roads, while Ari kept watch, scanning the sky for any sign of the Valric. Your world is quiet, Ari said softly. Peaceful. Ben smiled, eyes on the road. Most days, yeah. I'd like to keep it that way. Ari turned her gaze toward the stars. If the Valric find the vault, no world will be safe again. Ben's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Then we stopped them. An old friend. They arrived at a small airstrip hidden deep in the woods. Old hangars and rusted planes sat under the pale moonlight. Ben parked the truck and hopped out. Stay here, he told Ari. If anything goes wrong. I will not leave without you, she interrupted, her voice firm. Ben smiled faintly. Fair enough. He approached the largest hangar, where a sleek, patched-up starship rested. Inside, a wiry man with messy black hair tinkered with an engine. Marcus, Ben called out. The man turned, raising an eyebrow. Ben, didn't expect to see you again. I need a ship, Ben said without preamble. Fast and quiet. Marcus laughed, wiping grease off his hands. That sounds expensive. Ben pulled a small bag from his pocket and tossed it onto a nearby crate. Will this cover it? Marcus peeked inside, eyes widening at the stack of credits. Yeah, this'll do. He grinned. Where we going? Ben hesitated, then said, a place no one should be going. Marcus shook his head with a chuckle. Always the exciting jobs with you. No turning back. Minutes later, the ship hummed to life. Eri slipped aboard, her eyes scanning the controls with quiet intensity. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Who's the alien? Friend, Ben said simply. Marcus shrugged. Your business. Just don't get me killed. As the ship lifted off the ground, Ben sat beside Eri in the co-pilot's seat. You sure about this? Eri's voice was steady. If we do nothing, the Valrek win. We cannot allow that. Ben smiled faintly. I like your style. The stars stretched before them, endless and unknown. But together, they would face whatever came next. And as the ship disappeared into the dark sky, the real battle for the Saren Vault and the fate of the galaxy had begun. The stars stretched endlessly as Marcus's ship raced through the cold void of space. Ben sat in the co-pilot's seat, his heart pounding with quiet determination. Beside him, Eri worked on the data core, her silver-blue eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Every passing moment brought them closer to the ancient Saren outpost and to the danger waiting for them. How much longer? Ben asked, his voice calm but tense. Eri glanced at the glowing map. We are close. 15 minutes. Marcus whistled softly from the pilot's chair. I don't know what you two are mixed up in, but I can feel trouble coming. Ben chuckled dryly. You're not wrong. Eri's fingers moved swiftly over the controls. The Valrek may already be there. We must be prepared. Ben checked the homemade pulse launcher at his side. We're as ready as we'll ever be. The silent battlefield. Moments later, the Saren outpost came into view. It floated quietly inside a jagged asteroid belt, its silver surface worn from centuries in the cold vacuum of space. Strange glowing symbols pulsed faintly across its surface, a sign that ancient technology still slept within. But they were not alone. A sleek, black Valrek warship hovered near the outpost, its engines humming softly. Ben's heart sank. They beat us here. Eri's expression hardened. But they have not found the vault yet. There is still time. Marcus frowned, gripping the controls tightly. I can drop you close, but if they spot me, I'm gone. No offense, but I'm not dying for your alien treasure hunt. Ben clapped his shoulder. Just get us in. We'll handle the rest. A dangerous descent. Marcus guided the ship through the asteroid belt, weaving past tumbling rocks and sharp debris. Ben and Eri slipped into the small loading bay, preparing to board the outpost. Stay sharp, Ben whispered. Eri nodded, her pulse emitter glowing softly in her hand. We move quickly. The vault is beneath the main chamber. With a hiss, the loading ramp opened, and they leaped onto the cold, metallic surface. The silence of space pressed around them as they crept toward a side entrance, avoiding the Valrek patrol scanning the area. Ben keyed into the access panel. Can you open it? Eri placed her hand on the ancient Saren lock, her fingers glowing faintly. The door shuddered before sliding open. Come, she whispered. They slipped inside, the heart of the outpost. The corridors were dark and silent, but energy still hummed through the walls. Faint Saren lights guided their way as they descended deeper into the station. Ben's voice was low. So what exactly is this weapon? Eri hesitated, then said, It is not a weapon in the way you understand. It is a core, a living energy source. With it, the Saren could control matter itself. In the wrong hands, it could destroy entire worlds. Ben shook his head. No wonder the Valrek want it. As they reached the lower chamber, a massive door stood before them, covered in glowing Saren symbols. Eri's heart quickened. This is it. She stepped forward, placing the data core into a slot on the door. The symbols flared brightly as the lock began to release. But then, a sharp sound echoed behind them. Ben spun around, heart pounding. The Valric had found them. The final battle. 3 Valric hunters stood in the corridor, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The leader, a towering figure in black armor, raised his disruptor staff. "You cannot stop us," his mechanical voice hissed. Ben fired first, his pulse launcher blasting the nearest Valric backward. Eri moved swiftly, releasing a bright wave of energy that shattered their scanners. The Valric leader lunged toward Eri, but Ben threw himself in the way, blocking the strike with a metal shield. Pain shot through his arm, but he gritted his teeth and stood firm. Eri didn't hesitate. She activated the final lock on the Saren vault. The great door groaned as it slid open, revealing a glowing crystal sphere suspended in the air, a shimmering core of pure energy. "The heart of Saren," Eri breathed. The Valric leader roared in anger, charging toward the vault. Ben grinned through the pain. Not today. He pulled a small energy grenade from his belt and tossed it at the corridor ceiling. The explosion sent metal and debris crashing down, cutting off the Valric's path. Eri grabbed the Saren core, its warm light flowing through her fingers. "We have it. Let's go." Escape from the outpost. They sprinted back toward the loading bay, the station shaking from the battle's damage. Marcus's ship hovered nearby, its engines roaring to life. "Move," Marcus shouted, opening the ramp. Ben and Eri leaped aboard just as the Valric cleared the debris. Blaster fire streaked past them as Marcus punched the thrusters, sending the ship rocketing away from the outpost. The Valric warship tried to follow, but Eri activated the Saren core, releasing a pulse of energy that disrupted their systems. The Valric vessel spun helplessly as Marcus accelerated into hyperspace. A new beginning. In the quiet of the ship's cabin, Ben finally let out a long breath. "We did it," he said softly. Eri held the Saren core in her hands, its light glowing softly. "Yes, the Valric cannot control it now." Marcus laughed from the cockpit. "You two are insane, but I have to admit, that was impressive." Ben smiled, leaning back against the wall. "So, what happens next?" Eri's voice was gentle but firm. "We keep it safe, together." Ben met her gaze, warmth filling his chest. "Yeah, together." And as their ship vanished into the stars, one thing was clear: no matter how far the Valric chased them, as long as they stood side by side, humanity and Saren would never fall.